Jain ascetics in India. When this was 1975, when I went on pilgrimage to India, and I was in, let's see, it was Rajagaha. Yeah, Rajagaha. There was a Jain festival, and this was, there were two sects of Jains. One is called Saitambara, which means the white-clothed or white-robed Jains. They wear robes, a white color robe. And then the other sect is called Digambara, which means those who wear the sky as their robe. And that means the naked Jains. And this was an annual festival of the naked Jain ascetics. And so they had traveled, many of them had traveled from different parts of India to converge upon Rajgir, even traveling, I think, from Gujarat, where the Jains are quite numerous. And so there was a group of them, completely naked, and it was really cold. It was like this was early November. It was about, outside, we were wearing sweaters, if I remember. Or at least we were wearing the pullovers. So it could have been about 60. For India, that's pretty cool. Maybe 55 and 60. And all of these Jain ascetics gather in this Jain temple. I had met up with a group of Thai monks, and we had gone to see the festival. The Thai monks are there with their cameras taking pictures. And they were talking with the Jain lay supporters and a little bit with myself. But the Jain ascetics were there right in the middle, very strict and stringent in their observances. I think the Jain lay devotees were looking upon us, the Buddhist monks, like we were just lay people wearing a particular colored robe. Okay, but now the king sees the Buddhist monks. He says, he says, "Here I see the monks smiling and cheerful, sincerely joyful, plainly delighting, their faculties fresh, living at ease, unruffled, subsisting on what others give, abiding with mind like a wild deer's. And I have thought, surely these venerable ones perceive," he uses, this is a peculiar idiom of the text, "successive states of lofty distinction." It means that they've attained different stages of, say, success of meditative attainments or stages of realizations with wisdom. And for that reason, they are so smiling, so joyful, so cheerful, and so on. And in my experience, I'd say that there's some basis for this king's statement, since I've seen when there are groups of monks who are really practicing quite earnestly, then, sometimes if you see the photographs of monks from Sri Lanka or Burma, there's a thing that when you take a monastic photograph, the monk is always supposed to look as grim as if his mother had died the day before. So I've seen the photographs of monks looking something like this. If you look up some of the writings of the great Burmese master Lady Soyador, Achan Munya, Mahasi Soyador, U Pandita Soyador. But when you see them in real life, outside of the photograph situation, they're quite smiling and friendly. I can't speak about Lady Soyador and Achan Mun because they passed away and I never met them. I never met U Pandita Soyador, but I've seen other photographs of him where he's in a real-life situation, not posing, and he's smiling. But just as from my own experience, that when there are groups of monks who are practicing seriously, sincerely, and you get them in a natural situation and they're quite smiling and cheerful and open. But when they're giving lectures too. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3. Okay, the fourth reason is, okay, the king says that, I'm a head-anointed Kshatriya king, and I have the power to execute anybody that I want, to find anybody that I want, to exile anybody that I want. Yet, when I'm sitting in council, some of the ministers in the council might break in and interrupt me, and then I have to plead with them, please, when I'm speaking, don't interrupt. But he says that here I see that when the Buddha is teaching the Dhamma, even to hundreds of people, there's not even the sound of one disciple coughing or clearing his throat. And then he gives an example. One time when the Buddha was teaching, one of the people in the audience cleared his throat. It must have been a monk, because then it says, then one of his companions in the holy life nudged him and said, "Be quiet, Venerable Sir. Don't make any noise. The Blessed One is teaching the Dhamma." Okay, so then the king thought it's wonderful that the assembly can be so well disciplined, even though there's no threat hanging over their head. So this is another reason for his confidence in the Buddha. Okay, the next few reasons actually all go together. This is part of a set that he sees some learned nobles, Kshatriyas, who are very clever in debate, and they hear that the Buddha is coming to their town or village, and so they make a determination that they're going to ask the Buddha some tricky questions, put him into a corner, and beat him in debate, humiliate him, embarrass him, and make him and refute his doctrine through their arguments and tough questions. But then the Buddha actually comes to their town or village, sets up to give a discourse, and then the people, these debaters, who are these learned Kshatriyas, when they hear the discourse, they become convinced by the Buddha's teaching, and so they don't even ask their question, but instead they give up their plan to humiliate him, and they proclaim themselves followers of the Buddha. They actually become his disciples. So this is stated with regard to first the Kshatriyas, then it's stated with regard to the Brahmins, then it's stated with regard to learned householders who are not Kshatriyas or Brahmins, and then it's repeated again for for samanas, for ascetics, wandering ascetics. And not only do they become convinced by the Buddha's teaching and give up their questions and their strategy of embarrassing the Buddha, but they actually go forth from that. They ask the Buddha for permission to go forth into the homeless life, and then they go off by themselves to practice, and then they become arahants. Okay, so for this reason, this is a ground for the king's confidence in the truth of the Buddha's teaching. Okay. The next reason, the king refers to two of his, here they're called inspectors, or they might be called chamberlains, like his personal attendants. They're mentioned a number of places in the Pali Suttas. Isidatta and Purana. It seems that they were related in some way. I think they might have been brothers or cousins. And they were the personal attendants of the king. And the king says that they eat the food that I provide them. I give them carriages to use. Their livelihood depends on me. And they have a good reputation because of me. And yet, despite this, they honor the Blessed One, the Buddha, even more than they honor me. Then he mentions one occasion when he was traveling together with the army, and he put up in cramped quarters with these two attendants. And then during the night, the two attendants, Isidatta and Purana, spent much of the night talking on the Dhamma, even while the king probably had just crouched on the ground wanting to sleep. And then they lay down with their heads in the direction of where the Buddha was staying and with their feet pointed at the king. Yeah, and if you know anything about Indian society, Indian etiquette, that's considered not only impolite, but it's almost, say, audacious or almost provocative. You know, even if one person points his feet to another, it's showing disrespect to that person. And if you're pointing your feet at the king, it's very risky, disrespectful and risky. Because the king, if he gets angry at you, he'll say, away with you, maybe punish the person. Okay, so he says, this is also a reason why did I infer that the Buddha is enlightened, the Dhamma is well proclaimed, and so on. Apparently the king must have had high regard for Isidatta and Purana, because he didn't punish them, but instead he must have taken that the way they showed respect to the Buddha to be a sign that they understood the virtues of the Buddha even more deeply than he himself did. Okay, then he comes to the last reason why he praises the Buddha. Or why he shows, this is not the reason for his inference. He doesn't say, this is why I think the Buddha is enlightened and why the Dhamma is well proclaimed. But this is a reason why he's showing such deep homage to the Buddha and showing such friendship to the Buddha. He says, again, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One is a noble. He's from the Kshatriya class. And I too am a Kshatriya, because the kings were Kshatriyas. The Blessed One is a Kosalan, and I am a Kosalan. Now, if I was the Buddha, maybe I would say here, wait a minute, king. Because as I explained earlier, the Buddha considered himself to be a Sakyan, and his clan, his state, was the Sakyan Republic. And from the standpoint of the Sakyans, they were in an independent state, self-governing state. But because Kosala, the state of Kosala, had sort of annexed the Sakyan state as a protectorate, they considered the Sakyans to be Kosalans. And so the king is speaking from his point of view, not from the point of view of the Sakyans, he says, when he says that the Buddha is a Kosalan. And then he says, the Blessed One is 80 years old, and I too am 80 years old. So you see, we know that the Buddha lived to the age of 80, and so this will be in the last year of the Buddha's life. Okay, and so he says, since this is the case, it's proper for me to show such supreme honor to the Blessed One and to show such friendship. Okay, then after saying this, he says to the Buddha, you know, I'm a king, I'm busy, I have a lot of work to take care of, and so I have to leave now. And so the Buddha tells him he can leave. And so then King Pasenadi, again, he gets up from his seat, again he pays homage to the Buddha, and then he departs. And the commentary tells us that what happened to the king after he departed, he went back to the spot where he had left Karayana, his commander-in-chief. And when he got there, Karayana wasn't there. Instead, he found an old servant woman had been left there in his place, and the servant woman told him that Karayana had taken the turban and the sword and had gone back to Savatthi. And so the king must have been suspicious of what's going on, and he must have had an inkling that now Karayana is going to hand the emblems of sovereignty over to my over-ambitious son, and now Vidutapa, the son, is going to usurp the kingship from myself. And so King Pasenadi, instead of trying to go back to Savatthi, he realized that even for him to try to go back there, it would be dangerous. He thought he would go to his nephew and son-in-law, King Ajatasattu of Magadha. And so he left, apparently by foot, traveling a long distance to Magadha. And when he arrived at Magadha, at Rajagaha, the capital of Magadha, it was late at night, and the gates of the city were all closed. And so the king was very tired from that long journey, quite long for an 80-year-old man who's not used to exercise. And so he had to lay down at night to sleep outside the city. And from overexhaustion and old age, he died that night. Okay, so wait, I'll just finish the sutta, then I'll ask for questions. Okay, so after the king had left, then the Buddha addressed the monks, and he said, before he got up from his seat and left, King Pasenadi had uttered these statements, which now the Buddha is calling these Dhammacetiya. Do you know what the Chaitya? Chaitya is also what we call a stupa, or in Sri Lanka they call them Dagaba. It's like a memorial shrine. The Tibetans call them, what do they call them? Torten? Chorten. The Chinese, you call them Ta. For Ta. They take different shapes. The ones in Sri Lanka usually shape something like this, with a spire on top. And there'll be a railing, usually a railing around it. Like in Sri Lanka, every temple has one of the sort of necessities of a temple is the Dagaba. And then there are the famous big ones in Anuradhapura. the great Dagaba, the great Stupa, ruined Velisaya. Actually, there are 3 big ones in Anuradhapura. The Abhayagiri, Dagaba, and the Jetavana Dagaba, the 3 big ones. So the Buddha calls these sayings of the king monuments to the Dhamma, and then he urges the monks to learn those monuments to the Dhamma, and he says they're beneficial and belong to the fundamentals of the holy life. Okay, Katie, you had a question or a comment? Yeah.
Shortly after this conversation, and also in a manner that surely would have been eye-opening. All of his symbols of sovereignty were gone. He had to walk on foot, and he died outside of the door. Was a pretty swift bookend to his life. Buddha, he may have also been able to see the illusoriness of kingship as well as
It would have been a good occasion for him, but to my recollection, there's no statement about the King Pasenadi having reached any attainment. And if one looks in the Samyutta Nikaya, where there's a chapter of short suttas spoken to King Pasenadi, one doesn't find what I would call a deep Dhamma teaching there, but mostly they're concerned with doing the discourses that the Buddha gives to the king are mostly concerned with the inevitability of death, the inescapability of old age and death, the need to do deeds of merit. So apparently, and then there's no statement in the text, in any of the canonical texts, about King Pasenadi reaching any stage of equals Aryan attainment. So apparently he didn't reach, or at least I would assume he didn't reach such a stage. And maybe, in fact, there are some suttas that one finds where King Pasenadi is arranging, at least one sutta where he's arranging a great sacrifice with many animals to be killed, and another sutta where he says that the Buddha asks him what he's been doing. He hasn't seen him in some time, what he's been doing recently. And the king says, "Oh, I've been busy with the business of kings. Don't ask further about that." And then the commentary says that he's been launching wars and executing people. So it seems that despite his close relationship with the Buddha, the king didn't fully conform to the ways of virtue in his personal behavior. Yeah, I think there's also a story, it might be in a commentary, not in a sutta, where the king becomes impassioned with the wife of one of his lower order ministers. He falls in love with her. And so he transfers this minister to the army and sends him out in the forefront of a battle to get him killed so he can take over the minister's wife. So I think in his personal behavior, the king hadn't quite measured up to the full expectations of the Buddha. Did you have another?
Could you speak at all to the role of deer? This is a very broad question, but a good mind here is compared to the mind of a wild deer, is that correct? And then we look at the one of the previous lives of the Buddha as the banyan deer. And looking in even though this is an animal, and
Looking in the what?
looking at the structure of samsara, even though this is in the animal realm, it seems to me the deer is often, I'm asking you actually, can you speak about the role of the deer in this? And here we have a very high, that's a pretty high comment to say, to make the mind like a wild deer. Do you have any thoughts about?
I think maybe two things could be implied by this. One is that a deer is a very gentle animal, or at least the way we observe the deer from direct observation. They seem to be very gentle, quite peaceful in their style of life. So maybe it means that the mind is very gentle, very peaceful. And also, I think there's an assumption that the deer is able to wander wherever it wants. It's not tied down by a fixed home. And so the monks who are leading the monastic life are able to wander wherever they want. They're not tied down to a fixed residence. It's also maybe significant that the Buddha gave his first discourse in the deer park at near Benares. And then, as you mentioned, that he was reported to be the deer king in previous life, maybe several previous lives.
One thing that occurs to me, wondering about Prasanadi's idealization of the Buddha's community, and that the Buddha, instead of correcting it, lets it stand, and actually said it's a monument to the Dhamma.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Whether you have a thought.
It raises questions about whether, some of the words of praise that the king uses in regard to the Buddha and the Sangha are stock formulations that we find elsewhere in the text. So part of this could have been standard formulations that the monks had composed about themselves or about the Buddha, and which here they are putting in the mouth of the king as a way of showing that their own composed statements have the seal of royalty, the approval of royalty.
So are you thinking then that this sutta is something added after?
I wouldn't say that it's added after. It could be that the king really did utter words of praise of the Buddha, but the actual words that were used could have been amplified by taking these stock formulations and then ascribing them to the king. It's a very difficult issue to go through the text and say what is coming from directly from the Buddha's mouth and what is part of the formulation that has been established after the Buddha's passing and then ascribed to him. Since we have versions of the sutta in parallels in the other Buddha schools, obviously it goes back to a time before, I think, even the first division within the Sangha. But that doesn't rule out the possibility that parts of it were composed at the council. And then the fact that there are some minor differences in the versions in the different schools indicates that the sutta didn't reach its final form until sometime after the schools separated, or else that there were lapses in the memory and attempts to reconstruct details of the suttas in some of the schools.
So would the incident of Prasanadi would have obviously happened years ago?
Yeah. Oh, no, that would have happened, I don't know what the year was, but it would have been probably someplace in the middle of the Buddha's, I think probably in an fairly early period. because the Buddha leaves Kosambi in Sutta 128 and he goes to visit a group of monks. Amongst them is Anuruddha, who is a cousin of the Buddha. And Anuruddha later became like one of the great disciples, the one who is foremost in the divine eye. And at that point where the Buddha visits them, Anuruddha and the other two monks, his companions, have not yet reached arhatship. So it's still in a relatively early period of the formation of the Sangha.
Monuments to the Dhamma. The Dhamma means the Buddha's teaching, right?
Yeah, I would.
But how about the king say, I infer according to Dhamma?
Yeah, this is actually, I don't know if that's such a good translation now. It's, I think in Pali, it's Dhammanvaye or Dhammanvayena. I think it could well be an idiomatic expression meaning something like, I infer with good grounds, or I infer justifiably. Or I infer reasonably, rightly. Well, sometimes the way the word Dhamma is used in relation to reasoning, it doesn't mean so much the Buddha's teaching, but it means what is right, what is proper, what is reasonable.
This is translating monuments of the Dharma here, or what was the...
No, she's asking about this expression we get where the king says, I infer according to Dhamma.
Bhante, in your explanation, you said qualities. I mean, when you were explaining this sentence before, you say according to the qualities. Could Dhamma be rendered as qualities?
I'm not I don't think that would work here. I think sometimes in contexts like this, the commentary glosses the word Dhamma with karana, with the long A, which means reason, cause. So it seems that is the sense, or that's the way I would take it. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I think we'll have to take a break here and we go for lunch. Then I think we'll have to meet back here. Actually, they're finished with the retreat. But I'm not sure whether they might not have the room set up. So we could meet back here after lunch, say 12:15, just for a little short discussion if anybody has any more questions. Okay, we'll end with the sharing. And we'll have the class, let's see, today is 1st, 8th. Next week we'll do Sutta number 91. Yeah, I just want to occur to me some points relating to what Gina brought up about what I would call stock passages in the text. Like we get this long statement about how different debaters came to the Buddha and tried to, with the intention of refuting him and embarrassing him, and then they became swayed over by the Buddha. We get the same exact thing in Sutta number 27 in the Majjhima Nikaya. The beginning part of Sutta number 27. And then we get this passage about how disciples don't interrupt the Buddha when he's teaching. We find that passage almost, I think it's verbatim in Sutta number, again it's number 77. And so, it's very unlikely that, in the case of number 77, that the wanderer Sakalodai and King Pasenadi of Kosala just happened to hit on exactly the same words. Okay, so we'll share the merits with the Dhamma protecting devas, the fair spirits, the Buddhas, the Nagas, asking them to be well and happy and free from all harm and suffering. Akasata chabumata deva nagamedika punyantang anumoditva shirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva nagamedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavadacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu. Short way, sabbe bhutanumodantu, sabbe satanumodantu, sabba sampati siddhya, pavagupadaya avijihetato, etantare satakayupapanna, rupya rupicha sanya sanyino, dukkha pamuchantu, pusantu nibuting. Okay, then we end with the 3 bows to the Buddha. What, 3 half bows?
Bow for Bombay.